Hi, my name is Jason Zilberbrand. I'm the president of VREF, and I'm a full-time aircraft appraiser, software developer, and entrepreneur. Hi, my name is Jason Zilberbrand. I'm the president of VREF. I'm a full-time aircraft appraiser, software developer, and entrepreneur. Catch me on the Jesse T Show.
Beautiful, brother. All right. I'm about to kick us off for the conversation and bring us back into it. Do you need anything from me before we get started?
No, I'm good.
All right. And then if you want to drink anything, feel free
Cool.
during the conversation, but let's have at it. Just organic, two dudes having a chat, man. So 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Jason Zilberbrand, welcome to the Jesse T Show, brother.
Thanks, Jesse. Thanks for having me.
My pleasure, man. We had a great conversation a little while ago, and I wanted to expand on that conversation from the things that you've, experienced, the things that you do today. So just walk us through kind of high level. Who are you and what brought you to today?
Who am I? So I am, today I'm a full-time aircraft appraiser. It took many years to get there, but I'm a entrepreneur and a software developer. And I own and manage VREF, which is for lack of a better term, Kelly's Blue Book. So we are the equivalent to Kelly's, except all we do is aircraft. Track about 8,000 different models. We have about 700,000 subscribers, and we do about 18,000 valuations a month.
Wow. So there's a lot going on there. So how did you
going on?
How did you get to that point? Where did you start in your entrepreneurial career and some of the experiences that brought you to today?
Yeah, so I was pretty fortunate growing up in an entrepreneurial family. My dad was a serial entrepreneur growing up. He went so from the early days, it was the parking business. So he owned and operated like 35 parking lots in downtown Chicago. Sold it before any of it became of value, which was probably his biggest mistake in life, but you learn from it and you move on. But yeah, needless to say, I probably wouldn't be talking to you today if he would have kept half of what he had, but so be it. So in the early 80s, he sold off the parking business out of boredom. And then he started a salad dressing company of all things. And his claim to fame is he actually was the first cold display unit inside a grocery store. So back in the early days, if you're probably too young, maybe you remember, but there was only unrefrigerated salad dressing.
I don't remember that. No, I wasn't looking.
It's crazy to even think that it's a
Wow.
thing, but I mean, it's a pretty big deal. I mean, if you know anything about grocery store economics, the last thing they want to do is disrupt what they got going, and they don't like to carve out floor space. So my dad, being very tenacious, convinced them to not only carve out shelf space, but now it's the predominant portion of the salad dressing business at least in the United States. But
wow,
he started a company called Alexander's. I was in like middle school. He kept it for 2.5 years, sold it to Beatrice Foods, and moved on. And that was kind of like the theme. He would start something, have no correlation to another industry that he was in, learn it from the ground up. And by the time, he learned it, he was bored to death and sold it off. And actually, for the most part, he's pretty successful doing that. And then in high school, he was semi-retired. I think he was really looking for the next project, and somebody had handed him, basically a 3-ring binder with a business model that was called engine maintenance programs. And really what it was a life insurance program for business jets.
wow.
And so, yeah, if you go back early enough, business jets had very terrible dispatch reliability. They were super expensive. There weren't a lot of them. It was a very complicated sales process because people were flying them and demonstrating them as a pilot to somebody who's potentially going to buy it. And they had a propensity to blow up. The engines, they were called Garrett grenades back in the early day. And literally, they'd take it on a demo flight. The principal would be coming out to see a potential new aircraft, and they'd start it up, and the engines would have catastrophic events right there in front of them.
Wow. Not a good selling point.
No, really bad. It went on for quite some time. And what wound up happening is the manufacturer said, we need to subsidize, the engines because they're so expensive. For a lot of people don't understand, but the car world and the aviation world have very little in common in terms of valuing assets and how everything works. So in a business jet, a little bit more than half the value of that aircraft, the power plants or the engines.
Wow.
Yeah, they're so expensive and they're a fortune to maintain. And most of them are on a calendar or hourly maintenance schedule, right? So every couple thousand hours, you've got to go in and be prepared to write a check for $700,000 because that's what it costs to overhaul an engine.
Wow.
So my dad's business was, hey, you pay me an hourly rate for every hour you fly. And when your engine blows up, I'll pay 100% of the expenses. Sounded pretty good. And the problem was, is nobody was like, everyone basically said, how do we know we're going to be here when the engine blows up? Right. A
Right.
pretty common situation. So he was just a grinder, and every day, he'd enroll an airplane. And after a year or two, and now I'm at the end of my high school career, so I'm getting ready to graduate. The business started to take off. Couple of neat things happened. One, he had no unscheduled events for any of the aircraft he had enrolled, and two, it was a very interesting group of clients. They were all very high net worth or very well known, a lot of notables, and they all had the same thing in common: very wealthy, and they paid their bills. And he was just, growing it so fast that they really just ran out of manpower to deal with the company. So I got dragged in my second year of college. I got a phone call, hey, we're coming to pick you up. And the minivan showed up and lugged all my stuff in, and I had hair down to my shoulders. And Fort Collins, Colorado, 1991 is my freshman year, right? I mean, you can imagine what a complete antithesis it was from corporate, environment. But I was, wanting to promote rock concerts and do that whole thing. And he's like, nope, you're going to come work for the family business. And begrudgingly, I
Wow.
said yes. Yeah, I wasn't
Plucked you out
really.
of college. Didn't even give you an option.
It really wasn't an option. I remember him basically saying, you're either going to do this, you got to figure out how to pay for it, because I need the help and I don't trust a lot of people. And you're in the inner circle and you're old enough and it's time to go to work.
How did you feel in that moment? Did you feel like, was there some resentment, or were you all in, or were you just didn't even know where the road was going to lead?
Oh no, I was pissed. I was not happy about it. I think it was an interesting situation. A lot of my friends didn't have that opportunity, and I was very in tune with that. And I think, growing up in a, private school where everybody's parents make a lot of money. And, I went to school with the same 50 kids for 14 years.
Wow.
One of two very small private schools in downtown Chicago. To say it was being, completely isolated from the real world, I think is, not even close. I mean, honestly, you really get delusional really quick, right? I mean, when the poorest kid in your class's dad is a cardiovascular surgeon, we've got issues.
Yeah.
And
Not
and that
not in
was
touch with the 99% of the world, essentially.
no,
Yeah.
no. And I mean, I think all the kids I grew up with, I don't know. I mean, I don't really stay in touch with a lot of them, but the ones that I do, I think we all kind of have that in common. It's like, wow, we were so isolated from
Yeah.
everything, but I chose to go to a state school. I wanted to see what the real world was like. I really wanted to experience not having things force fed. And being a Jewish kid from downtown Chicago, I couldn't pick the most obscene place to go, right? I picked, it was a cowboy school, there, it was equestrian, it was agriculture. We had a decent basketball team, but for the most part, Colorado State in those early days was not known, for what it's known today. Um, Very much a 70s campus. The kids were predominantly from Fort Collins, going to school in Fort Collins. And here comes this big, city kid. And I couldn't have been more black to their white. I mean, it was just unbelievable. I had nothing in common with any of these kids. I had to listen to a lot of anti-Semitic, rhetoric, because that's how they spoke, and I remember, early in the first couple of weeks, I was like, I either have to like, assimilate and fit in, or I got to pack my shit and get the hell out of here, because it's not
Wow.
going to change, and
Wow.
that's when I realized I could get along with people from other, classes and other cultures. And, all these kids were so different. Not one of them was Jewish. Not one of them came from a well-off, home. And definitely politically and, and religious opinions back in those days, I think, again, it was pretty extreme. But what was really cool is that they wanted to learn about another way of life too. And so my
Oh,
my inner group of friends was like, wow, they would ask me questions about being Jewish or being from a big city. And I was getting, basically how to survive in the wilderness 101, right? They strap skis to my feet, they put me in a snowboard, basically as
hell
far
yeah.
remote as they could, and they would be top of the mountain, they'd all take off, and I'd sit there and cry like a, blubbering 18-year-old until I figured out how to do it. And the first time I went fly fishing, it's like, okay, Jews and trout don't get along. There was something about me. Every time I would tie a fly to my fishing line, I'd get nothing. I'd get completely skunked. So like, my friends are going further and further down the river. And it was a trip, growing up like that, where everybody was the same. And then all of a sudden getting thrown into like this new environment where everybody's completely different. And I loved it. I loved the fact that they were friends and it was pure. It wasn't like some concocted BS.
Yeah. Genuine people.
Truly genuine. And what's funny is those are all my same friends today. It's really bizarre. But like the
Wow.
kids I grew up with, didn't find anything in common with. And then all these kids that were from a complete different walk of life are truly like brothers to me. So yeah, you never know, right? And I think that was a big risk I took in doing it.
What prompted you to take the risk? Was it a place of just like true curiosity? Were you trying to challenge yourself? Were you trying to prove a point? Like,
no, you know what it was, Jesse? It was really funny. So my favorite trip of my childhood, my parents in like the early 80s took us to a working ranch in Colorado. I fell in love.
So just this experience you had as a kid resonated with you so much that you wanted to live that.
I got to tell you, the mountains called my name from like the age of 12, and I never looked back. And I really, that's what I miss. I miss not being there. I like to be able to do what I'm doing now, but be there instead of where I am. But yeah, and that was why I applied to all Colorado schools.
Let me ask you a question in terms about mindset and success leaving clues. And so you see these archetypes of different heritages and cultures around the world, and you look at Asian and Indian culture, and they're really great at instilling a mindset and a work ethic where you see a lot of like doctors and a lot of different like scientists come out of those cultures. And then for the Jewish culture, and I've had to this day, some of my best friends are Jewish, and there's this business like mindset where you have a dad, that can go into any company, almost like an Elon Musk, where he just like learns something and then he can operate it and then scale it. Like there's something in the DNA, there's something in the mindset, there's something in the teachings. What is it that you feel that from your experience helps even just specifically Jewish people to be great business operators? Because it seems like they're really good at it. And this isn't
it's
like this is a stereotype. It's true. Like
no, you're right. I mean, and that's the truth, Jesse. A lot of stereotypes do have a lot of right. There's a lot of truth to them, or they wouldn't become them to begin with. But yeah, this is going to sound terrible, but a lot of Jewish kids when they grow up all want to be a Sandy Koufax, right? Like for my generation, we all want to be Walter Payton or Michael Jordan. Yeah. And I think when you're 5'2" and a Jewish kid and you go to a small school, the chances of you being anything other than what you are, right? You just come to a conclusion real quick. And I think a lot of the parents, they weren't very good athletes. They weren't good at a lot of the things that, my dad and I never played catch growing up. We never went to a baseball game together. But if I asked them a question about the Board of Trade, let's go down to the Board of Trade, right? I was fascinated after seeing Ferris Bueller about, when the guys would talk with their hands. I was dying to learn what the hell all that was about as a young kid. Yeah. I remember it vividly. And he's like, my best friend from college is a trader. Let's go down. So that was what he would do. And I think the school that I went to was the school I went to, it was a progressive education private school. And so from their opinion is anybody that tried would get a fair crack, which is exactly what all the schools do today. You want to be on the team, you're on the team, right? And what it makes is a bunch of mediocre teams, but everybody's got an opportunity.
Yeah.
And I went to a performing arts school. That's what it was really known for. As a matter of fact, most of the actors, directors, writers have come from my school. A lot of the people in Hollywood, a lot of people I graduated with, they're all famous actors, a lot of them, high proportion. And I think what the school teaches you is how to be confident, what you're saying. And we learn creative writing. We learn those things. So we're not, I hate to say it, but we weren't, Friday Night Lights meant nothing. There was no football game. We didn't have a football team. And so
no distractions. It was, this is the path. This is success. This is work ethic.
It was work ethic. It was, I think it was funny. My parents never grew up and said, you're going to go get a job at Ford. You're going to go get a job here. You're going to go. No, there was never that talk. It's like, what are you going to do to earn a living? What are you going to do? Like, it was very crystal clear.
Beautiful.
That I had to build something if I wanted to, to be at the level of, the same people that I was growing up with. Now, you don't have a lot of choice. I don't know if that's good or bad. My kids aren't growing up like that. My kids are growing up much differently. and we'll see, right? But yeah,
Right.
that generation, right? So my dad was first generation in the US. His parents migrated over and they were just bombarding him with, how are you going to be secure? How are you going to make enough money so that, God forbid something happens, that because there wasn't a lot of backstops, right? Nobody really had any security nets. I mean, and talking about generation that took huge risks, moving their whole family to a foreign country, right? And it wasn't that long ago.
Right.
But we don't really, nobody talks about any of this stuff. Nobody really wants to talk about any of it. But I think that that's what it was. I think these traits get instilled because of fear, and then these people all migrate to the same neighborhood. And the real difference was is that they stayed in their neighborhood, right? So the Jewish guy that came over that knew how to bake bread and became a baker, right? And somebody else became a banker. But what they all had in I think what they all really had in common was the fact that they were entrepreneurs. They knew how to start a business, they knew how to run a business. Um, my dad will be the first one to tell you he didn't learn anything going to school. He didn't go to college. It was all school of hard knocks,
Yep.
right? You lose a
Yep.
dollar, you remember it. It's amazing how all these failures are tied to financial situations, but that's what it's like growing up in a city Jewish family. I think all of my friends basically grew up the same way. We all had that same drive, that same work ethic, and all of us realized early on we weren't going to be playing sports and making music, but we were pretty good at making money. We were pretty good at figuring out how to run a business. Um, can't tell you how many of my buddies were either running bookie operations or selling dime bags, right? Every single one of them was they all started their business instantaneously,
Yeah. Oh,
right?
yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
but those were the days. And I think, I don't know, it's weird to think about it, but it's true, and I've had, my wife's family's not Jewish. So I see how they're, the way that they grew up, and it's completely different. I mean,
Yep.
I don't know. It's just, it is, it's very much, I think, tied to the immigrant, the way, you don't know where your meal's coming from. So you
You got to
better,
hustle.
yeah,
Yeah.
you better bust your ass, right? I mean, and I think that's the way I look at every day. I look at every day like I'm blessed to be where I'm at. And if there's money sitting on the ground, I'm not going to walk by it. I'm going to pick it up. And if that means I got to work an extra hour, I work an extra hour. But that's where the work ethic comes from.
That's beautiful, and it sounds like this culture that came over as immigrants. My family came over from Italy, but this culture from where your ancestors came from, like these little communities, like almost like kibbutzes, right? Like it sounds like they
Yes,
made one
very
here.
similar.
They made one locally where they had their band of extended friends and brothers and sisters and people they knew from communities from prior coming over here, that they built this infrastructure and network where they could really, if it was entrepreneurial minded, well, that's like the average of the five people you have around you. Like if all your five friends are high level or producing entrepreneurs and you hang out with them long enough, you're going to adopt some of those skills and habits and do your own thing.
Well, you're right. And I think that there's a lot of truth. I mean, and people say it all the time, but I mean, if you want to become a billionaire, go get a couple billionaire friends. I
Yeah.
mean, they will teach you by osmosis more than likely, right? I mean,
And
you
then
just
trade with each
learn.
other, and the,
Yes.
the whole community aspect of like you
Yep.
do business with people that you like, you trust. I mean, it seems like this beautiful, almost like AAA baseball, like it's a farm system to get people to go from where they are to like become a pro. And it was in become a pro in business.
It was become a pro in business. And I think the neat thing that happened is that there was a generation, transition, right? So the dad handed it off to the kids and the kids handed it off to the grandkids. And now we're seeing fourth, fifth generation businesses. And yeah, I mean, the statistics are definitely not set up for success, right? I mean,
Yeah.
most of those businesses fail,
Yeah.
but it's incredibly interesting when you have such a niche business that's become so powerful where your obstacle to entry is so large that you almost can't screw it up, right? I mean, if you go and build buildings your whole life and you've got 50 buildings, I mean, what the hell could possibly happen? Even if you lose the money, even if they drop in value, right? Your net worth probably isn't impacted by that. And I think that that was a big lesson I learned, through all the previous recessions. This old money, it's really difficult for families with that kind of cash to be in any sort of situation unless there's a lot of, you know, redundant problems like what we see in aviation, right? That's what causes crashes. But um, yeah, I don't know. Preservation of wealth, I think, becomes very easy then when you're dealing with that kind of
it becomes a living thing where it's almost like an entity outside of just, money, where you have other revenue streams coming in, you have other, your money's working for you. And it's almost like a bank where it becomes too big to fail. Like if you don't
You're right.
catch a terrible drug habit and go to Vegas for like a few months and blow like a huge part of
You're
your
right.
fortune,
You're right.
it's gonna be an entity that continues to kind of grow on its own.
Well, and you got to remember too that a lot of these kids that were coming into money were not the ones, like, they weren't instant rich. They grew up that way. So it's kind of crazy how many rich people that became rich quick blew it all. I
Oh yeah,
mean,
because they
talking
don't know the
hundreds of millions of
principles.
dollars.
They don't know that. Yeah.
They didn't understand, and it's a sad lesson of have gone through. But I think that that's, these big family offices and the way that they basically either create a generation of another entrepreneur or somebody that's going to go into, the public sector and be charitable, right? And I think that that's really the two avenues that, all the kids I grew up, that's basically with what they were faced with. Am I going to go and start something on my own? Or am I going to go work for mommy and daddy until eventually they go away?
Yeah.
Right. Or am I going to go do something and give my parents money away? And it's bizarre to even say it, but those were the basic options.
Those are the avenues at that point. There's just different circumstances. So kind of jumping back to your pivot to the entry point to where you are now, you said you were promoting for rock shows or promoting rock bands.
Yeah.
Who were the bands that inspired you? I mean, because I'm wearing my favorite band's t-shirt right now, so it's funny.
And it's a good one. So
one of the best. Yeah.
So the early 90s was kind of a cool era because it was the transition from hair metal right into grunge and punk rock. And I went to school unknowingly in the skateboard capital of the world. Fort Collins, Colorado. That's
who knew? Yeah.
Yeah. I
mean, you think like California, like LA, or some like a hip metropolitan place.
You would have thought, right? Yeah. So what's really crazy is all those Southern California punk rock bands, Big Drill Car, All, Descendants, right? All the spin-offs from Black Flag. I mean, we're talking like legitimate punk rock, Southern Cali punk rock, right? They all spent almost all of their time in Fort Collins.
Wow.
The blasting room is the recording studio. That's where they all recorded. We all hung out at this shithole bar called Tony's. And I'm telling you, you'd go to the bar at Tony's and you'd sit down and Joey Cape, the lead singer to Lagwagon, would be sitting there pounding beers. And you're like, what the hell? Nobody knew, nobody talked about it. These guys were all very protected when they were in town. And one of the guys that I became friends with almost immediately when I moved there as a freshman was this guy named Chip. And all of Chip's friends were band members and like huge punk rock bands. It was just the most bizarre thing in the world. And Chip's best friend was this guy named Kaz. Kaz wound up becoming my roommate. And again, I had no idea, but Kaz's family, very hippie, very communal. Yep. They had this phenomenal house in the foothills of Fort Collins. And you'd go there and they had a half pipe and all sorts of skate stuff. And there'd just be, 100 kids hanging out, skateboarding. And then there would be a band. And then there would be another band. And like Kaz is actually mentioned as a thank you in just about every punk rock album that's been produced from like 1987 to like 1992. I'm not even kidding you. It's the craziest thing. You go in the liner notes and it says, thanks, Kaz Dudley.
Wow. Just because of the environment and
they had an open door. So anytime a band was coming through, they would go to Fort Collins because they wanted to hang out in this cool environment. So what wound up happening is California, all those bands started, going on tour and Fort Collins became a stop. Well, Kaz moves in with me. Now I have like instant street credibility. It was thing, right? It was like, I don't know. I have explained this to a bunch of people and like, they look at me and I'm like, no, you really don't understand. This guy was like, he was the man in town.
Like a demigod. In that environment.
Yeah. And he chose to move in with me because I had a spare bedroom for a summer, but that was it. That's all it took. And they're like, well, if you're friends with Kaz, I mean, like, and so I get a nickname and now everybody's hanging out with me.
What's the nickname?
It was Squash. I mean, to this day, there's nobody there that knows what my real name is. Like, and I'll be sitting there hanging out with guys, and someone will walk up and start telling a story and they'll be, about this guy. And I'm like, that was me. And like, get the hell out of me. And I know that was really who you're talking about. It was bizarre.
Awesome.
Yeah, really weird. So that was the environment. So it was a lot of punk rock bands. So it was like, Green Day early on and Offspring and big bands today. But back then you'd be lucky to get 30 people to show up.
Yeah, everybody starts somewhere, right?
I swear to you, we used to do them at these little AFWs, because nobody, or VFWs, what the
Yep.
hell we call it, right?
Yep.
VFWs.
Yep. Yep.
Nobody would let us in. Nobody would let anybody, with this kind of music do anything, that would potentially stir up this really lily white community.
When
So
punk rock was still like raw and it was in its
it
its
was
infancy.
very rebel. Yeah,
Yeah.
it
Yeah.
was definitely, and there was a lot of skinhead, a lot of that stuff was still going
Variants that
on.
kind of sprouted off. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that that was also very interesting for me to see as a Jewish kid that fell in love with a
Yes.
genre that was so against my religion there was a lot of um,
Wow.
niches within punk rock that did not jive well with Judaism. I mean, let's just be, complete. It was completely blatant too. I
Right.
mean, and you would see that at shows, and there was a lot of, Heil Hitler stuff and a lot of red suspender stuff. And
Mm-hmm.
I think it was a very valuable lesson to me, because I've never been one to be like in your face. If you want to say something, you're entitled to your opinion. But I learned real quick, don't open your mouth. Don't tell anybody anything they need to know. Right. And just stay under the radar, because those are the groups of people you don't want to interfere with.
Right.
And so, yeah, I kind of just, I accepted it for what it was. It was a really neat, interesting, learning lesson to know that there are people still out there. But for the most part, most people were pretty cool, even throughout that kind of craziness. So fast forward now, so I'm doing all this, and it's now my sophomore year, and I'm really like, I got my stride. Like, I got my group of friends, I'm dating a girl, everything's going great,
Life is perfect. Yeah.
yeah, snowboarding half my life. I mean, I really love the town. I mean, it's a really neat place to live. It's 68 degrees every day of the year, right?
Wow.
Beautiful weather. I was having a blast. And
Is it a mountain town like Colorado? Is it
it's in the
mountains?
foothills.
Yeah.
It's
Okay.
right in the
Foothills. Okay.
foothills. Yeah.
Yeah.
So when the weather comes through, it's gone in a half hour.
Yeah.
We get, 4 feet of snow and it'd be gone that afternoon.
That's amazing.
Yeah, it was really just a beautiful place. And the stadium was amazing, it was right in the foothills, just very majestic. And the town was hadn't been touched, since probably the 60s, early 70s. A lot of room for growth. And that's
Yeah.
exactly what started happening. Everybody started moving there.
The secret got out, so to speak.
Yeah, I think the secret gets out eventually in all good places. I
No
mean,
matter
we're in
what.
Boise now, right? But yeah, I think part of me realized, or maybe sensed, that my parents thought I was having too good of a time, you know, and
Yeah.
that's not okay. I wasn't born into the Rockefellers. There was no way my dad was going to sit there and let me just party it up and not do
Right.
anything.
Right.
And I think he was really concerned, because I really was having such a good time, that school was really becoming almost unimportant. I just didn't care. So yeah, he makes the phone call and he's like, hey, you know, we are coming to pick you up. And the we was him and his business partner, who I actually introduced my dad to, because his wife was my homeroom teacher in 7th grade.
Oh
Right. So,
wow. Okay.
real weird. I've left that out, but kind of on purpose, only because it's such a strange situation. But my dad's business partner was my mentor. He really looked out for me from an early age for no reason. He was my soccer coach. Um, I think he maybe thought that, we would eventually do something together or whatever. But my dad eventually became friendly with him. And so they went into business together with Jesse. That was the name of the insurance business. And so the two of them called me together in a conference call. And they're like, look, we need a sales guy. This is what's going on. We're coming to pick you up and we'll be there next Saturday.
Wow.
Okay. Right.
Life as you
So,
know it was about to change forever.
yeah. I mean, I basically was like, okay, guys, my dad's coming to get me. This is my going away party. I don't know if I'll see you guys again. And, it was
Did you
funny.
tear it up? Was it a crazy like going away thing, or was it more
Yeah,
like
I think
sentimental?
so my house was like where everybody was hanging out. So this was a big deal. I was about to shake up. But what wound up happening is everyone kind of went their own ways. We all stayed in touch, and I was going back, and probably once a year. I think that lasted until I was in my early 30s. I'd go back every year and hang out for a couple of days. And I got real lucky. Denver and Colorado became part of my sales territory for the insurance
Nice. So you
company.
had an excuse, so to
I
speak.
had a
Yeah.
I had a convenient excuse to go in and say hi to everybody. And I really think that's what made the difference between us just being acquaintances for 12 or 18 months when we're 18 years old to being lifelong friends. I put the effort in.
Yep.
And I don't really do that a lot. It's kind of strange, but I did for them. I don't really know why. There was a lot of relationships I had where I just
I
chose
could tell
not
you
to.
why right away. It's just like being in the military, and you have your band of brothers. Like you went through some shit together, like highs and lows, and you
It's very true.
sacrificed, and you saw things together, that shared experiences that no one else had with you. So it reminds you of home.
Yeah, that's a big part of it. I mean, and it's funny because now we're all almost 50, and a lot of us have kids that are grown up and out of the house already. And we don't even act like we're anything other than 18, right? It's really
It's
weird.
great.
But you have your group of friends that are the same way, I'm sure.
Oh
It's
yeah.
just, it is what it is. So
Yep.
yeah, I'd go back and we'd party it up for vacation, and I come back, go right back to work, and but then you get married and things happen, and
Got to
now
grow
it's
up a
like
little bit.
yeah, it's once every 5 or 6 years if we're lucky, but we talk all the time. But um, yeah, I mean, that was it. I was entering corporate America. I got home that Sunday. That Monday, my mom wakes me up at like 8 a.m. It's like, you're going to get your hair cut. I mean, I had hair literally down to my
Yeah,
shoulders, right? I mean,
makes sense.
I was very unhappy about that. The
Mm.
earring got removed. Um, all of my flannels got packed up. My mom took me to J. Crew, bought me a button-down shirt, and she's
Culture
like,
shock.
"Yeah." I was like, "Oh, geez, this is like really happening." And then that was it. I mean, I've been working ever since. Um, During the early days, it was still very much a mom and pop company, and I think that that was a real advantage I had because it wasn't this massive infrastructure. I could find my own way, but more importantly, people had the time to help me. And
Yep.
I tell this is like my number one thing. I mean, I think mentoring has gone away a lot. I don't really think either generation that would be involved in that relationship care anymore, right? The older people don't care, the younger kids certainly don't. They can Google everything. And I
Right.
think that
YouTube
that's a
University. Yeah.
yeah, it's a big part of it. I think old people, for the young guys listening, old people like to be asked,
Of
about their
course.
experience,
They
and
want
they
to be
like to
relevant.
teach.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, it's it. I mean, and we like to tell stories, and we like you to think that you're learning something from us. And the truth is, there is a lot you can still
You're
learn.
50. You're not old.
No, but for my industry, I am, because there's
Yeah,
very few
true.
people my age that have been doing this 30 years. I mean, it's just, it's a weird thing. So from like a career standpoint, I feel old,
Like
even though my
the elder
age.
statesman in your tribe, so to speak.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, because to gather 30 years of experience doing anything, unless you're a professional athlete or a
Right.
musician, I mean, that's a different bailiwick. But you know, I don't know any doctors my age that have been practicing 30 years.
I was thinking the same thing. I'm like, well, unless if you're an athlete, you're old at 50, right? Like you're not
You're
going to be
done. You're
performing.
done.
Yeah, unless
Yeah.
you're pulling a Floyd Mayweather and still finding ways to make 25
Yes.
million a fight for fighting a YouTuber. Again, back to YouTube, right?
Right. Or you're a Phil Mickelson, right? And you get
Right.
lucky.
You can play certain things in your older age, but man, so you got into this whole new career, mom and pop business. Were you doing sales? Was that the first gig?
Yeah. They basically said, look, you're just going to sink or swim.
What a gift! What a gift that
Well,
was.
I think that it was the best decision they could have made,
No question.
because with the technical industry, someone could spend years teaching you, you'll never know anything. And I think they trusted that I wasn't going to throw in the towel. I think they put a lot of faith in me that I was going to follow through with it. At the same time, you don't really realize you've learned anything until 10 years go by. It's really, I felt that way experiencing it. I felt kind of like I was treading water. I wasn't really, it wasn't that I wasn't losing any ground, but I also wasn't gaining any.
Right.
And I was very deadline driven, and I was very motivated by earning more money than I did the last year. And sales is a real tricky situation, especially for someone who's that young.
Yep.
I didn't know that I was going to be able to do it. I didn't know that I was going to make it. I didn't know. I had no confidence. It was very difficult. But what wound up happening is, I think a lot of people, they can sense that when you don't know what you're talking about, right? And you're pitching somebody something and you really don't know what you're talking about, they either hang up on you or they say, look, kid, this is what you need to know. And I think I was very fortunate because corporate aviation in those days was so small, and these guys were doing so little in terms of flight operations. And you got to remember, the average business jet only flies 400 hours a year.
Wow.
So for a lot of directors of aviation or corporate pilots, they have more downtime than work time.
Yeah.
And if they answer their phone, they got no one else to talk to. And I picked that up real quick. So I'd
On the
go and
job training.
I'd bang on a hangar door. and be the director of aviation for Volkswagen. Hey, let's
Wow.
go to lunch. Got nothing to do. Okay. And he would just sit there and teach me everything I needed to know about his aircraft and his engine. And they would tell me their war stories. And it's amazing how a good sales guy, and I've seen this from time to time, really good sales guys absorb everything that everybody tells them. And then they kind of make their own gibberish version of it. And then they start, putting it out there,
Yep.
I
Like a
found that,
chameleon, you adopt, you adapt,
yeah, you
Yeah.
become, though it's like the highlight reel of everybody that's had influence on you.
Yep.
Right. And you try not to do the same things that they did wrong, but at the same time, you try and take all the positives out of their
Yes.
spiel, so to speak. It was a spiel.
Yep.
My dad has a sales shtick. Like
Yeah.
it's very repetitive.
They call it word tracks in sales. Like I came up through sales too in a lot of different ways. I was selling things as a kid, comic books, baseball cards. I was selling, you said your friends were selling dime bags. I sold drugs for 2 years. And
Yeah.
then after I went to the military and kind of got that stuff, I've been in sales my whole life. Like it's you develop a story in one
Story.
way, and then you develop techniques and different things. And it's practice. You got to continually learn. And once you stop learning and once you think that you've arrived, you'll get capped out and you'll get surpassed by your competition like that. So,
there's no question. There's always somebody waiting to take what you have.
No
and
question.
that's the golden rule, right? So you never, ever stop. But yeah, I think you do it enough, you get polished. And that's what happens. You learn what the objections are, right? You know them before they're coming. You learn the personality, you learn the character traits, you learn what to say, what not to say. Politics back in those days in my industry was a big way for me to gain respect and trust, right? They wanted to know that I was not going to become a little liberal tree hugger. They wanted to know that I was going to be a diehard Republican.
Yeah.
Okay. You can be whatever you want to be when you're a sales guy. That's what's so wonderful about it. And so in the early days, I was like, wow, this is not that difficult. These guys are all basically the same, right? They're all very military. Don't piss them off. I learned everybody wants to be under promised and over delivered in my industry, right? And I think there was just a couple tricks I learned in how to deal with the personalities, and certainly dealing with really wealthy people. They're always right. You got to know when to back off, and at the same time, I think you have to have the confidence to know when to step in,
Yeah.
because that's what they're paying you for. That's what a lot of people don't realize. But rich people definitely want advice, so they wouldn't be, waste their time with you.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, I did that for 10 years, just the bantering back and forth, and it was a very negative environment for the most part, not because of the business, but because of what we did, right? We only dealt with problems. So when my phone rang, I knew that the guy on the other end really needed me. I
How to
think
put out a
that
fire. Yeah.
yeah, and it became, a very stressful environment, but at the same time, I had a really important place within the company, and the company had a really important place within the industry. And I built a name, and one thing led to another. Unfortunately, my dad's business partner got really, really ill. He went to South Africa. He got meningitis. He fell into a coma. It was a horrible situation. For the first time ever, being an adult, I witnessed my dad not having all the answers. That was a huge thing for me, because my dad always did have all the answers. And here I am dealing with this like mess, and my dad really doesn't know what to do. And it eventually forced the sale of the company. My dad couldn't deal with all of it on his own.
Wow.
Second biggest mistake that he made, and I know this one he really truly he painfully regrets, but at the same time, I think it was there was really no other option. He didn't have the ability to do the whole thing, and it was a very big company. And so in 2004, we both stepped away. We hired a company to take it to market and sell it,
Yep.
and we started buying and selling aircraft full time. And it was really bizarre, because he looked at me like, I don't know what we're going to do, but you got to go find something. You can't just sit around and do nothing. It's not the way you were raised. And, just the whole thing started all over. And I'm like, God, 10 years in and I'm already dealing with this. I really didn't think that was ever going to happen. I thought that company was going to be my legacy.
Your
Right.
golden parachute. Yeah.
That's what I thought. And yeah, so everything comes unglued, and he's like, look, you're going to have to figure something out.
Wow.
And I was really lucky. I'd sold 3 or 4 aircraft between '02 and '04, right after 9/11. I had some really quality customers came to me for help, and I didn't do it for the money. I did it because they asked me to, and I wound up getting, paid a lot of money by the manufacturers in those
I
days.
remember
So
you
that was like,
telling me the story, the aha
yeah,
moment. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah. So I'm literally sitting there, it's like the end of the year, and my bank calls and they're like, hey, we need to verify a wire. that just came in, and I'm like, okay. And they give me the number, and it was $50,000. And I had never had that much money come into my account.
At
I'm like,
one
oh,
time. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah. I'm like, no, there's definitely something wrong. They're like, all right, well, let us know. And so I called Wichita back in those days because it was Raytheon. And I'm like, hey, I just got $50,000 waiting to me. They're like, yeah, thanks for the selling the two aircraft. I'm like, you got to be kidding me. He's like, no. He's like, nobody told you. I'm like, no, I had no idea the money was coming, and that's a big light bulb moment. That did a
Wow.
lot. Gave me working capital for the first time ever.
Yeah.
Never been handed that kind of lump sum of cash. Gave me confidence that I actually knew what I was doing. Gave me confidence that I could actually meet the demands or requirements of a customer outside of what I was, thought was going to be my job. And so I took that, and I said, Dad, I think there's way more fun. We can make a lot more money, and we don't need anybody. It's like we can just do it ourselves. And that's exactly what we did. We opened shop in the first floor of his house, and we started buying and selling aircraft, not having a clue what to do. Um, I
The
mean,
good
when I
old
say not a
days.
clue, yeah, I mean, this is still the internet's out there, but the internet in its infancy was actually nothing like it is today.
No, not even
Kid,
close.
yeah, the kids growing up today have no clue. I mean, there have been so many industries completely ruined by the internet,
Oh
and
yeah.
and ours was one of them. You got to remember this stuff's trading even back in the early 90s. This stuff was trading at 10 to $15 million for a new business jet, right? Internet comes along. Now there's listing services, and now they're telling people what the price of all this stuff is. But coincidentally, that is when VREF started in 94, really with the birth of the internet.
Yep.
And yeah, it was mind boggling to me that, you would once be able to sell something and you'd be able to bury your commission, and the guy buying it or selling it, he would have no idea what the worth, what the value of any of this stuff was. But
Because you didn't
now,
even know you were going to get paid on it.
yeah, a
You're,
lot of the times you didn't. I mean, that, it was a very, it's highly speculative. There's so much risk involved, but then you've got the flip side where it's so sexy and
yeah.
so exciting and so enticing. And it's like, who the hell doesn't want to be around business jets all day long?
Seductive. Yeah.
Real, and yeah, and that's exactly what happens. It becomes like the gambler, because all you tend to, talk about are your wins, but the losses, it'll eat you up. So we ran a dealership just the way you would run a car dealership. We had inventory. We had to pay curtailment payments every 30 days for any inventory that was still in our inventory that hadn't been sold,
You
right?
were motivated to sell. Yeah.
Yeah, you had to
Yeah.
close, and you had to keep your pipeline full, right? So you're continuously looking for new stuff. And with the two of us, it became quite difficult to do. I mean, as crazy as it sounds, I don't know. I guess this goes back to the way that I was brought up, and the enough was never enough, right? I mean, you've heard it, how big of a boat do you need a water ski behind? But the truth was, if you showed, some success and you were good at it, you just wanted to keep building it. So
Yeah.
we didn't cap our own potential. We just kept trying to take on more and more and more. And then in 2004, I had a customer. Actually, it was probably close to the end of 2005. I had a client that came to me from the insurance days, and they said, "Hey, we've got a delivered, a to be delivered aircraft position. So it's just a paper contract. Like, we don't want to keep it. Do you want to buy it?" I'm like, "Well, send me the paperwork." So I looked at it, and I was like, something's wrong here. I was like, they'll sell it for 16 million, but I can sell it for 28 the day that it delivers completed.
Yeah.
What the hell am I missing? And I called them back, and I'm like, "Are you sure you guys want to do this?" They're like, "Yeah." I
You
called the
gave them the option.
manufacturer.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was like, "This is so crazy to me." I was like, "Who leaves this kind of money on the table?" I called the manufacturer. I'm like, "What am I missing here?" They're like, "Nothing. You just don't have permission to buy that position from them. You can't buy it and then resell it." I'm like,
Oh.
"Why?" Like, "Well, there's language in the contract that prohibits that." I was like, "Okay, well, we'll see about that." Hired a lawyer, figured out a loophole. Swear to God, this is a true story.
This
Figured
is
out a loophole.
great.
We found that there was a restriction, but it had to do with individual transfer. It had nothing to do with corporate transfer. So we
So
bought it.
if you had a tax ID number, a bit, you
Yeah,
had
we
a
bought it
business.
through a corporate entity. That's exactly what we did. And I sold the LLC, whose
Oh yeah.
sole asset was the aircraft. And I sold it to a company in California.
Beautiful.
Did the first one, made a ton of money, called my buddy up. I said, "Hey, can you get more of these
Yeah,
positions?"
you were hooked.
It was like right out of a movie. I'm like, "Oh, what do we got to do to get more positions?" He's like, "We'd have to go meet with them." I was like, "All right, set it up." And he's like, "Are you
Done.
kidding?" I'm like, "No." I'm like, I'll buy 12 aircraft right now." He's like, "All right." One thing led to another. Before the end of the month, I had bought 8.
Wow.
Before the end of the month after that, I bought another 8. I mean, we're talking, I had loaded up like 28 aircraft positions in a matter of months.
Damn. What
We
kind
were,
of output was that in terms of cash or
we had,
dedicated cash that you had to spend?
we had 300 million in a credit facility and we had like 285 million extended.
Wow.
Yeah, it was crazy. It was a lot of money.
How do you okay, so that's rough math, almost 600 million total aggregate. How do you this isn't traditional banks, obviously, because I work
Oh,
with
it was non-traditional. So that's
yeah.
so great. Yeah, I'm back in the day in business aviation, 100% financing, asset-based existed,
Yep.
right?
Oh wow. Okay.
Right. So this is 2004. This is before the meltdown. The banks didn't really know any better.
Wow.
And so the way it worked is I would negotiate a liquidated damage clause in the contract, and then that would match my down payment. So I already knew what my loss was. I was capped. It was 10%. So I take 10%. I had my skin in the game. Then
Yep.
I borrow the rest from a non-traditional lender, a finance company. They would partner with me in exchange for a back end interest rate loaded deal. So I wouldn't even write them a check until it's sold.
Is this a hard money lender kind of deal?
No, but it was definitely not. And I'm trying to remember what the interest rates were back in those days.
Sounds high. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I want to say we were probably paying out 15 to 20%, right?
And
But I mean, who
yeah.
cared?
Yeah.
Who care? Because what was the alternative? I get a 6.5, 7% loan, and then everything's on me.
Right.
So like this way, I was like, this is terrible. Finance company's my partner. We both eat shit at the same time, right? And the only thing I got to do is come up with my 10% down payment, and I just roll it.
And
And a
what were
lot
the
of them.
price points on like the variance? Like was $10 million plan, $30 million plan?
So this is what wound up happening. The manufacturers got wind to what I was doing,
Okay.
and they actually were very cool in the beginning. There's like, look, we know you're advertising these things. We know you're competing with us. As long as you do what you say you're going to do, we're fine with it. That quickly changed. Like, no, you can't advertise positions when we got a 6-year backlog and you're undercutting us. Like, you can't do that.
Yeah.
I'm like, well, what if I just sell them back to you? And that was it. Right now, I became the line of credit for the manufacturer. And once that happens, it's like it's a different dynamic. It's a lot more risk. But I was totally comfortable with basically parking their inventory, and then if they needed it back, I would give it back to them. And it was just it was an agreement we had.
Wow.
And then in exchange for that, they said, okay, we're going to let you do what you're doing, but now you got to operate an airplane. So they made me buy one for personal use, which is, note to self, the worst decision anybody could ever make.
Is it really?
I got to tell you, it's so much fun. It's exhilarating. You get to go to places you never thought you would go. You get to be with people you never thought you would be with. And it's all great until the first invoice comes. Whoa, that party cost me that much money. Like,
right.
Like the country club, it's the chit sheet of life.
Bigger toys, bigger cash flow needs,
Someone's paying the bill. It's like, there's a scene in Wolf of Wall Street
Great
where
movie.
one of my favorites, where Leonardo and his buddies are sitting in the conference room and the dad comes in to go over the American Express.
Yeah.
It's like one of the best scenes ever.
They're trying to hide the strippers.
Right. I mean, it was the same thing. It's like, wait a minute. My buddies came in and they did what?
Yeah. Yeah.
They bought 12 shirts and 12 of this and 12. I'm like, it's $7,000. Don't worry about it. It was that kind of mentality.
Yeah.
What's crazy is nothing good lasts forever. And I think, nobody knew that this was, that the meltdown was right around the corner. But yeah, we had loaded up on a bunch of inventory. We were selling them, like hotcakes. I was so busy. I had a Nextel and I had an iPhone and this phone. And I mean, they were all ringing off the hook. I was working 24/7, making a buck. And it was too easy. I mean, let's just be honest. Nothing should be that easy, and I think that was part of why, if it's too good to be true, it is. And that's why the economy busted like it did. And, everybody was doing 100% financing. No one had any skin in the game. There were a lot of instant gazillionaires from Russia and India and Brazil that were perpetuating a market that didn't exist, right? I'm selling aircraft into Russia that they won't get for 7 years, but they got money burning a hole in their pocket. Like, well, we couldn't buy it fast enough, right?
Wow.
There were a lot of similarities between what was going on in those days, 2006 through 2008, and what's going on today. And that is a lot of bubbles, right? A lot of competition, a lot of scarcity. And, that's why I always warn people, these are the types of environments you got to be really careful of.
Oh, yeah. Yep.
And so that's what happened. My first wife went into labor with my first child, and the market crashed. And then they basically closed down the Russian market because it had dropped like 1,000 points in 15 seconds, and basically all hell broke loose. Lehman Brothers went tits up, and my phone decided that it was going to have a conniption fit and call me every 2 seconds from some guy threatening me.
Wow.
And it was that bad. I mean, it was, there were people that were literally like, hey, we literally just closed on this aircraft. And my bank's telling me I'd be lucky if I could even liquidate it. I'm like, what do you want me to do about it? I had no control over it. We're all in for the ride. So I spent the next 4 years doing workouts, and that was, look, I mean, it sounds really negative, but the truth is it wasn't, because I learned so much about the finance community and banking and the manufacturers. And there are ways to unwind things where people don't get hurt. There are ways to get through crisis where you can actually come out on the other end and you're okay.
Wow. Yeah.
Was it fun? Hell no. Did I enjoy it? No. But the truth is I learned more in those 4 years than I did in my 30-year career. I mean, and the fact that I'm still here is a testament to the fact that anybody can make it through anything. I mean, I made $40 million in a year and quickly lost just about everything. Right.
Wow.
And we're talking net. I mean, that kind of money. So when you can generate that kind of revenue and that kind of income, it does weird things to your mind. You believe you can keep doing it. And that vision, that to be able to create that vision is part of the trick in convincing yourself not only that you can do it, but that you do it. And I think that there is a lot of people that don't get it, but you can convince yourself, right, to come out of things. You can,
Of course.
right? And if
Yeah.
you've learned how to make a dollar, all you got to do is remember what you did to do it in the first place, and you'll do it again. And I think what the trick for me was getting undistracted. I needed a clean, break. I needed a fresh restart. And I wasn't going to get that in the brokerage community because it's such a small industry. I didn't really want to do it anymore. I didn't want to go from buying positions and buying my own airplanes to going and selling Mr. Rich John Doe's and having to deal with the same thing that a real estate broker does. It's a nightmare. There's no guaranteed sale. I don't control the purse strings. And I learned early on, you either control the buyer, the seller, or the asset. And when you're brokering, you control nothing, right? Because even though you have a contract with the seller, it doesn't mean that they have to actually do it. And the environment was so bad that I found that the only real way to sell anything was to basically sell it for less than you were asking, so that the buyer felt like they were getting a good enough deal that there was a motivating factor for them to close.
Yep.
And then that just turned into this I don't know, I basically got so depressed and I got so down in the dumps. And I think people, when you're dealing with them on the phone or in person and you're depressed, they can sense it.
Of course. Yep.
My body language was off and everything that was going on was off. And yeah, so things just become self-perpetuating, right? So you stop closing, you stop selling, you can't get out of the rut, and that rut can last forever. And I think for me, it was just having to have a clean break. So my dad and I parted ways. First time ever in our professional career, for mine anyway, that we didn't work together.
Wow.
And I traveled with him when he was doing the parking lot thing. I was always his right hand man. And this was the first time, we parted ways. I went and found a new partner with basically a whole fresh outlook on the industry, with, a new dynamic in terms of how we were going to generate revenue. And so I went into the liquidation business for a bunch of Russian entities. And I started bringing aircraft that were brought over there back in the 2000s, and I started re-importing them back into the United States and liquidating them. And I was hired to do a project, and that project led to another one. And I wound up doing about, I don't know, 40, 45 aircraft. And I came to a conclusion. I just couldn't do it anymore.
You're
It
just
was,
done.
yeah, it was 3 years, 4 years. I couldn't deal with the lying. I couldn't deal with the time changes. I couldn't deal with not speaking the language. I couldn't handle not knowing what people were saying. It got so paranoid for me that I'd go over there and I really, if anybody's ever been in a meeting where you're the only one speaking your language, it's really easy to feel like everybody's out to get you,
For sure. Yeah.
and I just didn't have a lot of faith that these deals were going to be, I'm putting my family basically on the line, right? Am I going to be able to pay my bills because these people don't want to be honest with me? So Yeah, I had a real hard time. And one of the things that I had done is I went through the accreditation process and became an appraiser during that time because I had to provide legitimate reporting to the Russians to back up all of their sales. It's really weird. It's just the opposite of what everybody thinks. Everybody thinks it's very much like, Rocky Four, and it's not. It's not Rocky Four at all. It's very much, it's real business. They just speak a different language and they just have a different way of doing things. But, if you're working for a big corporation and they just happen to be Russian, it doesn't matter. It's still the same process. It's still the same,
A
back
lot
up.
of that's propaganda, though, us versus them, and
It is.
America trying to, a lot of it's political, and I know personally, like I can attest to what you're speaking to. It's just a different language, different culture, but it's business just the same.
Yeah, you go over there, they have McDonald's, the kids want to do well just like the kids here, right? And when you go over there the first time, there's definitely some culture shock, but you realize that it's just, it's propaganda. And it's really funny you say that because I would watch BBC news and then American news and Russian news all on the internet. It'd be the same story with three totally different perspectives,
No question.
and
No
I just
question.
like, this is bizarre. I couldn't understand. I still, for a lot, can't get my arms around it. But um, I did not feel that the U.S. Russian relations were going to improve. Certainly, no time soon. And
Yep.
I started becoming like I wasn't really welcome anymore. And then I started feeling like, I'm the secondhand citizen. And when you're with a bunch of Russian guys, and you're American, and you're the only one that doesn't speak multiple languages or has multiple passports or isn't born into an oligarch, or yeah, you're a third class person. And that's how they treated me. I was basically, there to facilitate a very specific task. And if I couldn't do it or didn't want to do it, I was persona non grata, and that was that. So we had a call, and I said, look, guys, at the end of the year, I'm pursuing my appraisal business and we're going to go separate ways. If you ever need anything, let me know. And I never hear from him anymore, but that's okay. It was the proper thing I needed to do to basically go my own direction,
Exit. Yep.
prove I could do it, gave me my fresh start. And then VREF basically fell in my lap. I mean, it was a real happy accident. My dad called me and he's like, "You're done with the Russians." I was like, "I'm done. I can't sell aircraft anymore." And he's like, "You're really not going to do it anymore." He's like, "This is all you've done for like the last 15 years." I was like, "Well, I'm not going to say never, because I'm sure the second I say I'm never going to do it anymore, someone will call me tomorrow and ask him if I'll help him." I was like, "But this isn't going to be what I'm going to pursue, as a livelihood." And he's like, "What do you want to do?" I was like, "I'm praising aircraft full time." I was like, "I really like it, but the one thing that I know I could do is build one hell of appraisal company. I need a blue book." And he's like, "Well, why don't you just go buy Blue Book?" And I'm like, "Because they probably won't sell it." He's like, "Well, did you call them and try?" And I'm like, "No." And he's like, "Well, why don't you go try?" And I never even thought about it, but that's what happened. So I hired an attorney, and I had the attorney send a letter to the corporate attorney of Aircraft Blue Book, basically trying to buy Aircraft Blue Book. And this went round and round for months. And I actually thought I was getting somewhere. And then they pulled the rug at the last second. I'm like,
Hmm.
"No, we're going to keep it. We're really not interested in pursuing a sale."
How much money have you spent at that point, roughly, trying to
Uh,
get the deal?
10 grand, not a
Okay,
lot.
not too bad. Yeah.
No, I think it was mostly my time. I was really in it. I mean, I really, I went through the business model, and I wrote everything out, and I was like, this is what I'm going to do to transition it, and this is how I'm going to change it. And the more I kept going through it, I was like, God, you really know what the hell you're talking about. Like, I was like, I would hire myself at that point. I
Yeah.
was impressed that I was able to put it all together. Didn't happen. I went like super depressed, and I said, you know what? This is bullshit. There are other companies out there that do what Blue Book does. And so I called the owners of VREF, and they basically said, look, we're not interested in a sale. I'm like, well, everything's for sale. And they're like, yeah, but this isn't. I'm
That's
like,
some Gordon Gecko stuff right
it
there. It's like,
was, it was right. I was like, I'm running out of things to say it. Honestly, I mean, they're people from Iowa. They were good old Midwest people. I could sense that it wasn't a no. It was just like, who the hell are you and why are
right.
you?
They needed that, like you or trust you to a degree. Yeah.
And that's exactly what it was. But I knew it wasn't a no. It was just like, not now.
Yeah.
And I said, well, what if I come out and we have lunch? And that's what I did. I went out the next week, I grabbed my old man, and we went out and had lunch with him. And one thing led to another. I think 3 months later, I had the deal signed. They
Incredible.
basically gave me the keys to the door. Do what you got to do. We trust you. Grow the company. and we'll sell it to you at the end of 4 years.
What was the year that you started this?
So this was third quarter 18.
Okay,
Yeah, so we're right there. So I'm actually in the process right now of buying them out and
beautiful.
for the contract, and yeah, it's been fantastic. So yeah, the first year that I took over, I doubled the revenue of the business. Second
What,
year,
real quick, because that's you say that very nonchalantly because
I do say it nonchalantly because I
you've
hate
done
to.
it. But what were the protocols, systems, people that you made changes in to double revenue in a year?
So the company, there's a movie called Founders, which is the story of how McDonald's became McDonald's.
Was this with Michael Keaton?
Yes.
Yeah, yeah.
And I'm a huge movie guy, if you haven't caught
I've
on.
noticed you've referenced at least three so far.
Yeah. Well, I mean, because the way I grew up and those movies had a huge influence on
Same.
me, you know?
Yeah.
But this one I thought was really well done because it not only does it show you the mindset of an entrepreneur, but it truly shows you what happened, if you just trust your gut, and believe in yourself and know that, right, it was just a whole bunch of things kind of coming together. And that VREF for me was very similar to that because the aha moment I had was that the name was far more important than the company. And I know that sounds
Brand. Yeah.
crazy, but I mean, I would challenge anybody to go find me right now a 4-letter domain name that can be bought for under $10,000 that you'd be able to turn into a business. And I had a subscription business with a long domain name, and we weren't doing anything online. There was no marketing. There was no way to do any e-com. Everything was on a Rolodex. I
Mm.
was like, all I got to do is bring a bunch of technology and like all the things I know, bring it all in, bring a bunch of my people in to get it all going. Right. And it was like clockwork. If I put the banner up and I start pumping a lot of money into it, it's going to pay off. Everyone told me I was crazy. As a matter of fact, a couple of the finance guys that I had done a lot of those big deals with passed. I brought them along for the ride. And at the last thing, they said, no, we don't want to do it.
Wow.
We don't think you're going to make a run of it. Now, I can't tell you how many times they've kicked themselves in the last 2.5 years,
I
but
believe
that's,
it.
yeah. I mean, so today, so literally VREF went from having, they had about 400,000 subscribers when I took it over. So we've got about 700,000 now, but we went from generating like $65 a year off of each one of those subscribers to when I took it over to like well over 700. So, I mean, there was a lot of tricks, right? We had a great customer base. They needed to be taught that we were worthy, right? We had value, but they were getting it so cheap for so long. That's not so easy to do,
Yep.
you know? And I think that was one of the things that I tell a lot of people that are starting off in the SaaS business or the software as a service business, because it is such a great industry. And if you really can solve a problem, you can charge whatever you want, but you got to deliver. And I
Yes.
think, yeah, so for us, we were sitting on basically a gold mine because nobody had our data. But there's only one other company that has equivalent data, and it's not as good as ours because they just don't have the detail that we have. So I had to trust my gut that if I told them this is what it was and they said go away, they were going to come back.
Yep.
They couldn't go anywhere else. And that's exactly what happened.
Incredible.
And they weren't doing any appraisals.
There were 2 points that you referenced, and they were probably a decade apart. I'd guess based on the timeline of everything that you said that you, through business, had experienced depression, and
Yes.
as an entrepreneur, as a founder, as a human being, I've experienced that. I'm actually going through what's termed as a dark night of the soul right now, which basically, because I am on my spiritual journey and because I've done certain things in the last couple of years to bring me to where I'm at, it has me questioning, how I show up in my business and my relationships, and it's kind of like a cracking open in a beautiful way. So it's much needed, but it's it's the highs and lows of life, right? And so for you, going through these self-termed depressions that you've experienced, even just those two illustrations in our conversation today, what was it that got you through? What were the things, the people, the conversations? How did you pull yourself out of those places?
So for me, it was a lot of future projecting, my future self, right? I wasn't happy with where I was. And I do really believe that if you can create a vision and focus on it to the point where it almost hurts because it's the only thought you have in your head, you're going to obtain it at some point. And I don't know if it was like there's been so many people that I think over the years that have used the same trick. I personally believe it works. And so for me, it was a lot of just accepting kind of the PTSD, and I think that that's not and easy. The depression's almost easier than the recovery from the depression. I
Yep.
know that sounds crazy, but PTSD is a very serious thing. And if you went through something that was that traumatic where it changed your life, you're going to deal with the skeletons and how you manage that. Yeah, I mean, that's the real trick. So I had other similar, I had a really bad scuba diving accident back in 2005. I was down at about 75 feet and I lost all my oxygen. And that was like a life or death type of situation.
For
And I
sure.
suffered from panic attacks. I can't even tell you how much it ruined my life. Couldn't go in an elevator. I was like the guy that was walking up and down 35 flights of stairs. I had to completely rearrange my entire life. I was
Wow.
miserable, Jesse. I mean, I'm
Wow.
talking to the point where like shaking, couldn't breathe. Panic attacks are very real. Um, if you've never experienced one, it's like adrenaline coming on and you can't control it. And I mean, ruined everything. Couldn't go to rock concerts, couldn't go to places where there were big crowds. Was petrified all of a sudden of being inside closed spaces like an airplane. I was really freaking out. I mean, it was really horrible. And I also have a degree in psychology. So I knew what the hell was causing it, but it's so easy to be an armchair quarterback and not deal with
Oh
your personal
yeah.
stuff, right? So I just, I'll tell you the truth. I mean, I was so bad for so long that some people just said, look, if this is how you want to live your life, we don't really want to be around it, because we want to be able to go in an elevator. And I'm like,
Yeah.
geez, having an impact on other people. And that's all it took. Called my doctor, right? I'm like, I got to come see you.
It became bigger than just you. And there's this whole thing, a great conversation going on in the world right now about like self-love and showing up for yourself. But like a lot of people will give up on themselves or abuse themselves or hurt themselves before they'll hurt somebody else. A lot of people will.
Question.
And
Well, I
if,
think
if
that's just human nature.
yeah,
Right. And I think going back to the whole Jewish thing, the Jewish guilt thing is very real.
I was raised Catholic, although I'm not Catholic anymore. So
So
I
you,
get a little
you
bit of the
get it.
Catholic guilt.
Yeah, it's the same thing, right? It's very real. And so I was dealing with that. I'm like, all of a sudden, I'm not good enough for my family. I'm not good enough for this. I'm not good enough for myself. And
Shame, all that.
yeah, and then I think, something you just said is really important because I do think, you can invest money in the stock market and do really well, and you can have all these great things and all this materialistic stuff, but if you don't invest in yourself, that's when, the rubber meets the road. If something bad happens, you got nothing to lean back on. And I realized that. And it wasn't going to be me getting a master's degree, right? That wasn't going to do it for me in my industry, especially with a lot of people that have no degree to begin with.
Yep.
But I found this path through appraisal work that I could go get accreditations and continuing education and start building myself, and like really doing it and continuously investing in myself. And then hopefully people see that. And so that's what I did. I kind of just flipped the switch. I said, look, I can't do this anymore. I got young kids, they're going to start getting impacted by it. I can't walk around faking it anymore. I was like, I
Right.
don't want to walk around faking it anymore. Um, I had been divorced. I had gotten remarried. My second wife, who's incredibly patient, is also much younger than I am. And it's a good and bad. It's good because she doesn't know any of the stuff that I had to deal with, right? But it's
Right.
bad because she can't be there to support me. And I was like, God, I felt like the weight of the world was on me. The whole family is looking at me and I can't look at them. I had nobody to like lean on for any sort of help.
Wow.
My friends didn't really fit the bill because nobody had gone through it,
You
and
felt alone. Yeah.
there was a lot of that. And so, yeah, I just had to really, for me, it was, look, those negative thoughts, I think you've got to let them come, but then you got to let them go. You can't hold on to it. And what I used was something that, I think a lot of people probably do and don't realize it, but I poured all that negative energy into exercise. I started competing with Ironman. I started doing 10Ks every morning. I started riding my bike at lunch. I basically treated the day as a goal to be so mentally and physically exhausted, I didn't have capacity for the
Wow.
negativity.
Yep.
And it worked. I did it for a year. I got myself in phenomenal shape. I was able to kill my demons on my morning run. And I mean, we're talking like, I was going back to childhood. I was really dealing with some serious shit. And at the end of my run, I was like born again.
You
I mean,
felt
I
better.
can't
You're
even
talking
tell
about
you.
doing like what Goggins does, David Goggins, and how he running has become, do you know who David Goggins is?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. He does a lot of this type of work too. He was one of the people that inspired me to get out there. I started running a little more than a couple of years ago, but it's very meditative for me. It's very, get a lot of great business ideas while I run. I get a lot of like exercising demons, and
It's
it's
amazing,
so
isn't it?
powerful.
It is. Well, because I think all of us are chasing demons,
Yep.
right? We all have something. And I couldn't do it anymore. And I felt like, once I started, it was cool because when you first start running or doing any sort of long distance training, you're so up in your head with the physical side of it,
Yeah.
breathing,
Yep.
and am I going to survive? Am I going to make it? My legs are killing me, right? There's a lot of pain in
Sure.
that, and the pain distracts you. And I think that, getting through things like that and not having negative thoughts, and I'm not going to lie, there were a lot of times when I'd be like in the middle of a long run and something crazy would happen. I'd have a memory and I'd have to stop because of panic attack,
Wow.
and being able to fight through that. And I don't know, I felt like it was working for me. And so I kept doing it. And I got to a point where I could like have a normal day, and then 2 days, and then 3 days. And then, okay, I can let it go. I can have a bad Sunday every once in a while, or I'm human. I'm going to have negative thoughts, but they don't have to ruin my life. They don't have to distract my day. They don't have to derail relationships. Um, and then I think it's even harder once you start to experience success again to accept it. I
Yep.
had a real problem with that, like, do I deserve it? Is this real? Like, I don't remember who said it, but somebody was like, someone's going to call and the gig's going to be up, they're going to figure it
Oof.
out.
Yeah.
And that's a lot of stress to deal with, but that's what I felt like. I was like, someone's going to call and the gig's going to be up and I'm going to have to go find something else to do. And so I think every day it gets a little bit easier. And then there's still just a lot of dealing with it and letting go and knowing that I'm human. I'm going to make mistakes, and I can't be so guarded against making mistakes that it strangles my life.
Yep. Yep. It can't, it needs to be, and this will be good for the airplane conversation, but it needs to be a tailwind versus a headwind, right? It needs to be
Yes.
able to
Yes.
push you, motivate you, let it be, a linchpin for success versus, all consuming that you get constricted and you can't move, which happens to a lot of people. A lot
It
of people,
does.
they get, feel like they either place so much pressure on themselves or they allow so much pressure on themselves, they become immobile and they get stuck. And then, X amount of things can happen from there. But I think it's important for people to realize, because a lot of people are like us on this, on listening to this, where entrepreneurs, executives, people that are high performance type people, I truly believe, and this goes back to even Stoic philosophy, you need to challenge yourself physically to
No
be able to
question.
show up everywhere else in life. And honestly, to be an entrepreneur, you have to be fit for service. You have to be fit physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually to really to give your best and to give the most value. Because yes, I'm not saying everybody needs to be an Ironman or martial arts or like stuff that really pushes the line or the razor's edge, but damn, it makes you better at those things and it makes you more humble at those things and it makes you more empathetic because you know what it takes. But versus someone who doesn't do those things, I don't even know how people that don't train physically, how they can be entrepreneurs. I couldn't.
I
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that they just get really lucky, to be honest with you,
Yeah.
because I meet more and more people that are like this than not.
Yep. No
And I
question.
think it's work ethic, right? I mean, let's just call a spade a spade. I mean, when you are that dedicated to anything that physical, right, you have to have work ethic. Sure, I'd much rather sleep at 5 a.m. But where am I? Either on a treadmill or outside. I mean, it's religion. It
What is
becomes
your routine? Talk about it a little bit. We can kind of this close out on just kind of the
so
performance
what
side of it.
now that I have gone through the whole Iron Man culture, I've realized that it's really great for a short period of time, but there's no way the human body's set up to deal with
Not
it.
long term, no.
No, and I don't know how these guys, they're young and probably a little naive, but the older guys that do it, they're made out of, they literally are Iron Man. I've met some of them. It's totally insane to me that they can keep doing it.
Yep.
I actually loved the training. I hated the racing. It
Really?
was, yeah, I couldn't, so it kept triggering panic attacks.
Oh wow. Okay.
So I went through like a whole beta blocker routine, and that really helped me. But in a triathlon, the first event is a swim.
Yep.
There's nothing worse than putting your face in water, cold water, that's dark and
Yeah.
potentially dangerous. There's thousands of people around you that are all trying to kill you. And for people that don't have a clue how an Ironman starts, it's lit. You're all standing there bunched up, and they say go, and I mean they'll trample you.
It's a
If
free
you're
for
not
all. You
out,
got to go.
You got to get out ahead. Otherwise, you're going to get kicked in the face. It will take you out of the race really quick. And I realized that that was going to be a big weakness for me. So I became fascinated with water, with like just swimming and nonstop. And I got a coach, and she was fantastic. And I actually learned about how the human body works in water and how it slows your heartbeat down naturally. And I had to trust that it was all the
Mammalian dive
physiological
response,
stuff.
all that. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I just got off on it. It really changed my whole way of the way it worked. But yeah, so you start off with the swim, and then you got to do a run. And then the last leg, I'm sorry, you do a bike, and then the last leg is a run. And depending on whether it's a full triathlon or Olympic or a half, that dictates how long the legs are. So full, regulation Ironman, or, you're dealing with a marathon, and maybe, 100 and what is it, 160 miles on the bike. I mean, it's ridiculous.
Yeah.
So you do it once, and you kind of pat yourself on the back, and you get sick for 2 or 3 days afterwards. And you realize, okay, I'm done. I'm not going to do that to myself anymore. I can't beat myself up like that. But you don't let go of the training. So now, and because I really like it, I enjoy it. So in the morning, I do about 7 miles. And then and with COVID, I actually got way more um, regimented. COVID really disrupted, I think, every athlete under the sun more so than anybody else, because we all had such crazy routines and they were all taken away from us.
Yeah.
So I lost my gym, had to like build all sorts of stuff out in my basement. And it was right during winter. So I
You
was
should
on
see
the,
my garage.
yeah, I mean, exactly. But you know what's cool now? I got an extra hour because I don't have to drive.
Yep.
And I'm not showering there. I'm showering at home. So I basically picked up a half hour on both sides with the car and 15 minutes on the shower. So now I throw that into my routine. So yeah, I get an hour and a half to run in the morning instead of an hour. So I'm squeezing in, an extra mile or two, depending on how I'm feeling. And then I do a lot of yoga. I do a lot of core training. I don't lift weights anymore. Um, I did for a long time, and I just found that my body was in a constant state of pain.
Yep.
Like I don't know how guys do it when they get older, but the pain was getting too much. And um, I was just having a real hard time. I type a lot for work. And so I was having a lot of problems, with my hands. And so I kind of cut all that stuff out. But yeah, it's just a lot of core training, a lot of yoga. I do about a half hour of like abdominal core strength training every day. My diet is for shit these days. But you know what's cool? When you train for an Ironman, like, you can drop 20 pounds in a week. I mean, all you got to basically do is cut all the crap out. And
Yep.
it's easier said than done. But if you've done it once or twice, it's
You
like
can do it. You have
you
proof.
can do it.
Yeah.
Right. So I always say to my wife, I'm like, I need like photos, or it would be great if we like planned a vacation. I was like, I need a deadline so I can go drop 25
A
pounds.
Masoji or a goal, something to look forward
Yeah,
to that's gonna,
it's
keep
the
you on track.
truth,
Yep.
because I know I can do it. And because I know I can do it, I don't know. I've gotten to the point where if like pizza's there, I'm going to eat it. I was
No
so
question.
so long. I don't know. Uh, but I will say that professional athletes are probably the closest, which is why I think a lot of them, when they get the proper resources when they're young and have like a good group that they can trust around them, right? That they wind up becoming phenomenal
It's
entrepreneurs.
like LeBron James. I'm not a huge fan of him as a person, but what he's been able to do with the people he's surrounded himself with for a long time, and like he's breaking into film producing and all these
Pretty
different
amazing,
things that he's
right?
doing. It's incredible, and it's
Look at Magic Johnson. I mean, the guys, I mean,
Shaquille O'Neal. Like you could
yeah,
like these people are amazing entrepreneurs.
yeah. And they made way more money in their professional career post being a professional athlete than they did ever, right? I mean, Magic probably, I'm willing to wager he's probably made $1 billion, over the course of the last 30 years. And
I gotta imagine he did. Yeah.
Shaquille O'Neal might be a little different, but
He's coming up. Shaquille's an amazing human being all around, but he's I'm excited to continue to see what he's doing, man, because the things he's putting together, from franchises to getting his own doctorate, like
he's a
he's doing his
sheriff too,
thing.
I think, or a police officer. He's got all sorts of stuff that
He's an interesting guy. He's like the world's most interesting man, one of them. And
he
then
is.
our favorite, going back to, or at least I think it was your favorite, but it's definitely mine, Michael Jordan and his brand.
Oh,
I mean, his brand is the most recognizable in the world still.
I got to tell you, and this is the only thing I feel sorry about with my kids, because they're going to grow up not having someone like that.
Isn't
And
that incredible?
it's so important. I don't, and I had two actually, because
Walter Payton.
Walter Payton was really, for a Chicago kid, I mean, he was just perfection. I mean, the way he spoke, the way he interacted, and he held himself with such high, quality standards. I hate,
Yes.
there's no other way to say it, but he knew he was a role model. He knew what his responsibility was, and he took it incredibly seriously.
Yep.
And I think Michael had the fortune of having Walter, in the same city before him. But yeah, the guy's, I
Do you
mean,
think he mentored him even from afar? Do you think that Walter Payton's example, whether it was through conversation or just being out there and leading the way, like with his presence, like, do you think that had an effect on Michael and how he operated?
I do. I think the sports writing community was very tiny in those days, and they were very respectful of Michael and Walter, and I think Walter and Michael were really good at respecting them and having
Yep.
a relationship. And it was very much a relationship. And I think that that's the difference today. These kids, they don't, I mean, they don't care. I mean, and the truth is, a lot of these writers aren't career writers. So they're coming and going too. But,
Yep.
back in the 70s and 80s, yeah, there was the Tribune and there was the Chicago Sun-Times, right? And that was it. And if you pissed either one of those guys off, your career was dead. Right? I mean,
Yeah.
I couldn't imagine how Michael would have dealt with the pressure that a LeBron James deals with, just
Yeah.
from social media or and honestly, I've dealt with so many of these people over my 30 years in aviation that they just want to be treated like a normal human being. They want to
Yep.
be able to get up in the morning and go to the grocery store
Yeah.
or
Without being bombarded for autographs or questions
yeah. I
or
mean, they're just
interviews.
people.
Yep.
They put their pants on just like you and me. I mean, it's very peculiar, and when you see it firsthand. I've had fortunate enough, experiences with some of these guys where I've spent like a lot of time with a couple of them, and it's really weird. They're either hyper aware of the fortune they have, or they're so disgruntled. It's like, mad at the world. And
Yep.
I don't understand, that doesn't make any sense to me. But the ones that are like really in tune, it's just the coolest thing in the world to see. I mean, they really get it. Um, they're pretty amazing. They're like a big magnet. Their personalities attract, and whether they were a musician or an athlete, they would have something in that, something like that is would be their career path
Yep.
because they're so charismatic. They're easy for people to be attracted to. It's pretty
Yep.
cool.
Polarity just pulls people in. But
Yeah.
as far as for you and looking forward to the future, what are you looking to accomplish, bucket list or just business wise, before Earth is done for us?
So before Earth is done, I got to tell you, I've grown up now. My grandfather never retired. My father won't retire. I really am looking forward to retirement. I know
Oh
it sounds
yeah.
crazy, but I'm giving myself 20 years and I'm going to hang it up. I'm going to give the business to the kids, and I am going to force myself not to do anything because I've been killing myself for so long. But that's what I'm looking forward to. I'm looking forward to growing old with my family, aging gracefully, and really staying present. I think that that's something I learned over the last few years with all the issues, is that to stay present and enjoy it. That's what it's all
Yes.
about. And I try not to go in the past anymore unless it's my morning run. And then the future is how I end my morning run. So I'm really good now at like letting it go. And then what do I want to be in 5 years or 10 years, and setting that new vision quest, and then staying present for the rest of my day. And I have found that I'm a better father, and I think I'm a little bit more even keeled, if that's the proper term. Of just the peaks and valleys, I think. And that's old age. If you really want my honest opinion, as I get closer to 50, I think that that's what getting old is. It's being able to let it go. There aren't any more peaks and valleys. You don't get
Surrender.
as excited and you don't get as angry, but that's kind of it, man. I mean, I for a change, I got to be honest. I really like where things are at. I really like the fact that I live in the burbs now. I'm not this city kid who's trying to keep up with the Joneses. I don't. I do things because it's going to have immediate impact on my family, and yeah, it's cool having kids and watching them live vicariously, for you or through you, right?
Love it, brother. It's a great
Yeah.
perspective to have, man. Just being present, being where your feet are. I mean, most people spend a whole lifetime trying to figure that out, and it's really cliche. They say the present's a gift, but really that's all we ever have. I mean, we've already lived in the past. We don't know what the future is going to hold. We only have this moment that we're alive. So really being present is something that's there's whole industries and whole coaches that are dedicated to teaching people how to make this happen. So for you to be able to kind of have that mindset is a beautiful place to be. But Brother, I want to say thank you for this great conversation. I feel like we covered a lot of bases and we went really deep. So thank you for being courageous and vulnerable, and for being who you are, brother. I look forward to where our journey leads in conversations and friendship. And if people want to hear more about you and what you're doing, are there places they can go to check you out?
Yeah, thanks, Jesse. So my website's vref.com and my email address is jason@vref.com. And yeah, I would love to hear from people if they ever need anything or want to get in the industry. Yeah, by all means.
Beautiful, brother. Thanks so much, and we'll chat soon.